Biomimicry podcast with me, your host, Lily Ehrman. When we think of biomimicry, the first thing that usually comes to mind are products that mimic the shape of something in nature. The levels of biomimicry that are not as talked about, because they can be more difficult to understand, are process and systems level biomimicry. In systems level biomimicry, we look towards and are inspired by entire ecosystems or even superorganisms. Superorganisms are defined as an organized society that functions as an organic whole. Examples of superorganisms include ants or termite colonies and honeybee hives. Superorganisms can also refer to a collection of synergetically interacting organisms, such as the human body or fungal networks in the forest. In this episode, I sit down with Dr. Tamsin Woolley-Barker and chat about superorganisms, how nature adapts to change, and the importance of evolving our systems and companies to mimic the efficiencies of these natural models. Dr. Tamsin is an evolutionary anthropologist, biomimicry pioneer, and the author of TEEMING, a bestseller in organizational learning, environmental economics, ecology, and animal behavior. Her company, Team Innovation Group, helps organizations apply evolutionary principles and patterns in order to adapt more effectively. She is also the Dean of Geoversity's School of Biocultural Leadership and founder of the Borrego Institute for Living Design, the BUILD, in San Diego's Anza Borrego Desert. Welcome, Dr. Tamsin. I'm super excited to talk to you today. Would you please introduce yourself and state your pronouns?
Sure. I'm Dr. Tamsin Woolley-Barker, and I go by she and her.
Awesome. We're going to jump right in here. I want to know how you first got interested in biomimicry, and then maybe give us your definition of biomimicry.
Right. Well, I'm an evolutionary biologist by training, so I had a lot of biology background, but I've always kind of oscillated back and forth between art and biology in my work, and it had always been frustrating to me, like, you can't do both at the same time. So when I was going down the freeway and I hear this public radio segment, and it had an interview with Janine, and she was talking about biomimicry, and I was like, what? Hold the presses. This exists. This is what we're doing. So I just started calling people. I started writing a blog, and I never looked back.
That's amazing. Yeah, I feel like those of us who've heard Janine speak and have read her book, are just like the way that she talks about biomimicry is instantly captivating. I agree with you. I heard her talk at a conference and was like instantly in love with the field.
Right.
And so what has been your journey for learning from nature?
Oh, well, I started, I've just always been a biologist, I think. And even my mom was saying that we moved from Canada to, we moved from Canada to San Diego when I was 2, and our car broke down in the desert, Needles, hottest place on earth. And so we were there for 3 days, and my mom said I just spent the whole time watching the ants. So
that's amazing.
I feel like I learned everything I needed to know from that. But yeah, I've always been a biologist. I studied baboons in Ethiopia, and I guess I was looking for how does nature adapt to change and so that's exactly what I do now.
That's awesome. And you wrote an incredible book, a few, and TEEMING is one of my favorites, and exploring how superorganisms work, which is really cool. And we'll get more into that a little bit later. But I also want to know what made you fall in love with this practice.
Oh, well, I feel like I just was obsessed with it even before I knew about it. I think I always was thinking that way about, the world is fractal, the living world, and so looking at the patterns and things, even just flying in an airplane and looking down on rivers and realizing that's the same as your body, and so then realizing that all the patterns that I observed in the natural world were true, and then seeing all of the ways that we don't live according to that, in alignment with that. And so it's just kind of always something that I was obsessed with, of like, how can I figure out where we're falling short, and realizing that it's really a systemic worldview.
Yeah.
And so we just design in strange ways that don't make any sense.
I agree. Especially with the background of, for me, this, environmental studies and kind of the doomsday climate chaos that's looming above, the frustration of, what am I going to be able to do? Everything, the systems in which we live are so challenging, and it's hard to break free of that and design something that doesn't live in those systems. And I think that's what's intriguing to me about biomimicry, is that it's so, I don't know if disruptive is the right word, but so different than the status quo.
Right. And it's also, kind of a halfway point of where we can see our way into this other way of living in a way that we can still, we can still start making that transition from the old world.
Exactly. And so how are you applying biomimicry to your career and discipline right now?
Well, it's everything I do. I do it in two ways, mainly. But the first way is, how does nature adapt to change? So looking at the nature of evolution, how it works, and applying that to, our businesses, our lives, our work, so that we can make changes that we have to make very quickly, and so that we can make them actually happen. Yeah. So, like we're looking at all these countries that have pledged pretty ambitious climate goals, so they say, ambitious to them, but they still aren't able to make them happen. And it's a structural and a process problem. So I pretty much work on that level of trying to inspire a change in the way we work and the structures we work in, so that we can change the systems that they're part of.
I love that. It's so important too, and really daunting, I think. So I'd love to dig a little deeper into that. And if you're able to, maybe give me an example of a company or somebody you've worked with, or an organization you've worked with, and like how they're applying this kind of methodology to their processes. As a side note, here are a few qualities of superorganisms. They have a collective intelligence, distribute decision-making among everyone. Individuals retain their diversity, independence, and autonomy, and they self-organize. There are many more qualities than those I just listed, but you have to read Dr. Tamsin's book, TEEMING, for the full deep dive. Now, back to the interview.
Well, a lot of the work I do is with entrepreneurs. So this idea of, that all these different entrepreneurs are really like unique, irreplaceable roles, like niches within this ecosystem. And how can we increase the diversity and independence and design regeneratively so that whole systems grow. So that kind of thing. But the other thing is working with Fortune 100s. So I work with Cisco really closely, and we've been working on software or platforms that can embed biological structure and process behind the scenes, so that your experience and the way that information is presented and structured to you becomes more biological, so that we can do our work that way. And that includes, a lot of superorganism kind of processes, like the way that teams of ants work in little trios, and they have, one is a more of a leader type, more active and social, and the other two are more generalist workers. So those kind of things that we can embed, and then, sparking new trios of, so we can kind of triad in innovation that way. So they're using that in their organization with their employees now. And we've created a bunch of things for WebEx with that.
That's amazing. This is exactly trying to showcase kind of what's possible, and talking to folks like yourself in the field who've done the work and who are doing the work actively, I think is really important to tell these stories and to share that on a broader scale, because I feel like a lot of folks who I've talked to get really excited about biomimicry in the field, but then there's not really a clear understanding of where they can take it or what they can do with it yet. I think we're getting there. And that's why I'm really excited to talk to you, because I think there's a lot of things that you're working on that are a very big scale, but also kind of literal application of these learnings.
Well, yeah, because, people they just fall in love with biomimicry. It's very compelling.
Yeah.
And they love all the organisms and they love all that. But then, as you say, they often go, well, how can I do something with that on my budget or with the knowledge that I have available and that kind of thing. And even if you have scientists, do we have the materials? Do we have the, yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason I came to this work was because I realized that a lot of these companies have everything they need to do it, but it's the process and the structure that gets in the way. They just aren't designed for it.
Yeah.
So I feel like this kind of work is it's inexpensive. You don't have to make anything, but also it's foundational, so it can really change the way that businesses do everything and think about things. Right. Yeah, it's pretty. It's a game changer, I think.
Which is really cool also to see the companies that are stepping up, because it's no easy task, right, to do some foundational work, but so important. And like, you mentioned this in the book, there's so many changes that can happen downstream that are positive because of this work.
Yeah.
And that's the really compelling part as well.
Yeah, because I kept thinking, what can I really do if I can only do one thing, one person? I'm like, well, it's, okay, I can work on process and structure with companies, but ultimately it comes down to changing the paradigm that we live and work in. Just
right.
Sounds like a
no easy task.
Do that on the weekend, right?
Yeah.
So, but I believe that we can do it because what I've been doing is taking these very corporate people, very serious people, through this kind of organic design, this evolutionary design process, and they are starting to see that it's actually something they can do because, I used to tell them about it, a few years ago, and they go, well, that's cool, but let's be realistic,
right.
And now they're going, we don't know what to do. we know we need to change. We know we need a radical change. This isn't going to work, but what can we do?
Yeah.
And so they're asking me, like, what else do you have? And so they're willing to go much more structural and systemic than I have ever seen. And it's exciting.
That is really exciting.
I'm seeing it across the board. And I really think that once, there's just a hunger for it because we can't keep doing what we're doing. This fixing problems, it just makes for this fragile patchwork that is doomed to fall apart.
And you hinted at this a little, but I want to showcase also and explain a little bit more about like why is biomimicry important in our world today? I know we've touched on it a little bit, but I'd love to go down that path a little more. So any thoughts on kind of the importance of this work, especially in these companies? Like we're talking kind of vaguely about these challenges and why companies adopting this kind of mindset and framework is so important. But on even like a larger, even metaphorical scale, like why is a biomimicry mindset important in the world we live in?
Yeah, well, I found it's an easy in because I can come at it from innovation or resilience or things that they're really struggling with. And I often invite them to bring their children so it becomes more holistic. And the children teach up. But right away they get a quick hit on increased curiosity and consideration and care, engagement. And all the other things stem from that. So I found that even just the exercise of imagining and learning about these organisms and playing and creating, it puts them in a different mind space. So I think that's really important. That supercharges their understanding of resilience and the way that they design their cultures or cultivate cultures. It really changes everything. I mean, when you start looking at it biologically, you see the role of dominance, and you start thinking about it in a more biological way of like, how do humans suppress dominance, and why do they do it? To increase collective intelligence that we rely on.
Yeah.
But we're not structured that way. So those kind of things, I think biomimicry is super important for that, because we get into these companies and they first off, they see that level, the cultural level, and the innovation that they get from it. But then they go deeper because they see that their clients and their employees and even their families become more engaged.
Yeah.
And more, their critical thinking increases. And so just that is a win, right? But then it opens the door to them thinking more systemically about everything. So they're thinking about their company as a system. They're thinking about the flows of goods and materials in the world in systemic ways. And they start to see the leverage points that are there that they weren't even aware of. And so I really see a big return for them.
Yeah.
Going down this road. And then we get to the designing services and processes or products. There's so many wins from it before you even get there.
Yeah. And it's a huge challenge, I mean, for you to be tackling and kind of infiltrating, so to speak, these companies and starting to change mindsets. I think that's really powerful because, like you said, it applies to way more than just one area in their company.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like it's the leverage point, right? Like it's when you go at that level, they suddenly see like these simple fixes, these simple shifts can just unlock everything.
And something you mentioned that I think is important to note is that biomimicry relies on and requires an understanding of the natural world in order to translate those learnings. So I'd love to kind of tap into your scientist background and have you talk about your favorite superorganism and kind of what makes it work.
Oh, gosh. Well, I love them all. I mean, the ants and the honeybees are so good at what they do. But of course, we have to love on the mycelium most of all. I mean, technically, as a biologist, most biologists would not say that mycelium are a superorganism, but they do. They're genetically distinct and they reproduce as a colony, so they really do take on different roles, and they are all important. So it takes a village. It's a superorganism, just like us. But what I love is the way that they gather these specks of value in the landscape and water and nutrients, and they gather them and they deliver them to the trees, and they support the entire forest, And so they are supporting everything that we rely on. Mm-hmm. So they're my favorites.
I would actually say they're my favorites too. I love, and especially because you're walking through the forest or any ecosystem and the realization that there's so much life and connection under our feet. And sometimes, too small to see. That's what's intriguing for me is like, there's so much we don't see. And that's, working behind the scenes that's making all of this possible. And that there's kind of this like hidden beauty to that I really love.
Yeah, the planet's subterranean brain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just holding it all together. And then you think, if they're delivering nutrients to one tree over here and not to another over there, that like they're making choices about that. Like they're farming our world.
Yeah. I'm reading Suzanne Simard's book, Finding the Mother Tree, right now. And it's, I've been taking my time on it and like holding off on finishing it because I love it so much. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, I don't want this to be over yet. But yeah, she writes about all of that really beautifully and like the discovery of that and how it was pushed back against for so long in the community of this couldn't be right. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of the themes in biomimicry is like, well, let's push past that into what we don't know and start explaining these phenomenon and learning from them because there's so much to learn from.
Right. And it's a lot of that comes from the the scientific constraints of like foundational assumptions that we've made there that are changing rapidly.
Yep.
But it's a big shift.
Yeah, and it's really exciting to be part of. I think that this business as usual is changing rapidly, and it's really cool to see that kind of real time happening.
Oh yeah.
And a big question related to that I had for you is, in your experiences from what you've seen and what you've worked with and worked on, how do we translate those learnings from, learning from nature and getting these nuggets of information to larger scale innovation or really challenging that business as usual approach?
Well, I think, I don't do a lot of challenging or trying to convince people because I see that they need these things. and they know they need them. They don't know, they might not know what exactly that is, but they know that they need it. So, I don't do a lot of like behavioral shifts and things like that. I mostly focus on just the insight. And what I found is that if you have those really high level insights, you change everything. So I think it's the time is now. Everyone's hungry for it.
Yeah.
How is the rest of life solving these problems and dealing with things? And I think the other thing to really, what I love about it is that not only is it really hopeful, everything alive has survived to this point, including us. And so it has this kind of, we're all in the future together. And not just that, but it shifts the perspective on humans, right? Because it's like, we're animals too.
Right.
What is our role? What is it that we're here to do? So I think that's a radical shift for people, realizing, well, what would it look like if humans were creating conditions conducive to life? And then you go, oh, well, we always did. So let's just do that again, and what would that look like today? So, I mean, that's a radical shift, but I feel like we're coming up against it where there's not a whole lot of other options.
Right. And one of the really powerful elements of biomimicry for me too is introducing folks to this incredible practice. And there's almost this shift that happens naturally when when people are introduced to it. And I think you mentioned that it's like, even with the students that I teach, you don't have to do much to get them excited and make those realizations on their own, which I think is a really powerful component of this practice.
Well, yes, and it's all things they can observe for themselves.
Right.
It's not about fake news or this or that, and politics never even comes up because it's just looking with your eyes. Like, this is the way that living things work.
Right.
And you don't need a book or a preacher or anything. It's available to you.
Totally.
Even in your hand,
Yeah.
So, and that's a lot of the work that I do with Geoversity is, around land sovereignty and indigenous land rights. Because it's like, well, why do we keep the people out of the national park? Well, wouldn't it be better to have people that love the land taking care of it?
Right.
But we have that. So why can't we make that shift? And in fact, we have to. I think because it just reinforces that idea of us not being nature, and I don't think we can go forward with that.
Right, exactly. And that's actually my next question for you is what projects are you working on right now? And how can others get involved or support? Feel free to share some URLs, like whatever. What are you working on? What's exciting?
Yeah, okay. I got a lot of good stuff. Well, I just came out with the second edition of TEEMING, so that's fun. That's like my little Hawaiian vacation. I rewrote the book, but I like it. I like the second version of it, so that's good. I'm working on this new book called Your Teeming Transformation, and so I've developed 6 modules from it. So I've got these 2-hour workshops that I'm developing. And so the idea is that these are going to be the chapters of the book. And so I actually wrote this book. I wrote 250 pages of it, because I write a lot. And I got to the end. I'm like, what do I want this to do? Like, what do I want people to think, feel, and do? And I realized that I want everyone to read it, and I want everyone to experience that mind shift. So I threw out all the text and turned it into a picture book.
I love that.
So now it's like a 400-word picture book of just gorgeous pictures. And then these prompts, these just questions that prompt you through your teeming transformation. So it starts out with evolutionary design. And so, you're visioning, and then what's in the way, and then how would nature solve that? So that's a lot of fun, and it's very intense, and you come out with some insights you didn't have before. But then it deepens into the superorganisms, like how do you grow and activate your superorganism, things like that. So that's
Wow.
going to be fun. 6 modules of that, and the second one is this Saturday.
Okay, so they're like live workshops.
Yeah, live
Okay,
workshops, and eventually that'll be a course. So
awesome. And
that's
people
going
can
in there.
find that on your website?
They can go to teamlab.com, and it's TEEM
Cool.
lab.com, and that has all the courses on it and the workshops. And the other thing that I've just been working on is I'm offering outdoor experiential learning journeys. So, like, I combine a naturalist track. I don't call it a science track because I feel like people get intimidated
Mm-hmm.
by science, or they've had traumatic experiences and, dissecting things and whatever. So
Yeah.
it's really just, you're a human. Humans are naturalists. They're just really good at finding patterns. And so we just exercise that, right? So it's the naturalist track, the creative track, and it's in mythic time. So there's a storytelling component. Because I feel like people love stories, so they can enter the story together. We can create something new with all these other creatures there. So
That sounds
that
so
is,
cool.
yeah. So I started doing these with entrepreneurs and their kids, and I orient them to context and their nature, and then take them through like their adaptation. And so it was really cool to see like the kids get so into it, and they love drawing. I give them all nature journals, and they do that with their parents. And then the parents, I give them prompts for discussion on their businesses. So and we did it all day long. It was great. But then I got all these requests for it, more of those. So I thought, I can't be everywhere, so I'm going to create these experiential journeys. And then ultimately, I'm hoping other facilitators can teach those in their own places. Um, so I'm working on that, and those will also be available at Team Lab. And then Geoversity, the work there, we just did a Netflix documentary, and that was
Whoa.
really wild. It was really wild, very intense. In Panama, it was so our Geoversity campus is like 13,000 hectares, and it buffers the Cunayala, which is the semi-autonomous indigenous lands, which is, I mean, beautiful, beautiful lands, old growth, cloud forest, just incredible. And then down to the Caribbean, and then these islands, 350 islands. So me and Agar Tejada, she's a Kuna climate warrior and activist. So it was me and her, and we went down the river in kayaks, and it was crazy.
That looked amazing. I think I saw some pictures from that.
Oh my god! And then we stayed in the indigenous villages, and we talked to the chiefs about climate change, and that was just really interesting. I got held under a log. I had a life changing
Oh,
experience, and
whoa.
yeah, so that's all exciting. And then the Borrego Institute for Living Design
Yep.
is my ranch in Borrego Springs in California.
I
Okay.
was going to ask, is Geoversity a place and something anybody can join, or what is Geoversity?
Oh, right. So it's a 30-year NGO. It got it started as Earth Train,
Mm.
which was, about, saving the rainforest and conservation. And so they acquired this huge preserve, Mamoni Valley Preserve in Panama, and it serves as a buffer to the indigenous Cunayala territory, but also really what their mission is these to rehumanize habitats,
Mm.
to rehumanize our role, so people remember what we used to do and what we do, and to help indigenous people continue doing that. So to empower and develop leadership for them to keep doing that. So that's been
Such an
incredible.
important
Yes,
mission, yeah.
anybody can get involved. You can go to geoversity.org. We have a Geo School, which is an 8-week program that I'm the dean of that. So that's really around rehumanizing minds and revitalizing communities and regenerating ecosystems. So what's not to love?
Yeah.
So that's for gap year students, which, could be post-grad. We have 6 different species of primates, and we do a lot of research with Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute and Harvard. So there's a lot of opportunities for researchers, for people who want to work on the ground in agroforestry, volunteers. We always need volunteers. And then we do immersions, we do regenerative tourism work. And then Borrego Institute, people also can follow along and they can visit.
Yeah, Borrego Institute just looks so cool. I mean, I have such a soft spot for the desert too, and it just looks like such a beautiful location to experience place.
Oh, yeah, and it's really going off right now. All the wildflowers are opening.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, it's the best, yeah.
Yeah, I am so interested in this intersection between natural history and biomimicry, and I think sounds like a lot of the projects that you're doing right now, which I think is really cool and so important when introducing folks to biomimicry, and not even maybe the practice of biomimicry, but just loving and caring for the natural world. And there's that natural progression that happens of, okay, I know what this is, and I've learned about it. Now, what can I learn from it? Which is really cool.
Right, and because I find a lot of people look at organisms as collections of parts, because they just fundamentally don't have that vision.
Yeah. I'd love to hear some of your favorite ways to reconnect with nature.
Well, I don't need to reconnect to it because I just look at my hand.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the exercises that I do because, people are always like, oh, I don't have nature around me. I'm like, you always have it with you.
Yeah.
Good
reminder.
That's a big part of it. I mean, I'm not saying that to be flippant. I'm saying that is part of my process for reconnecting is just remembering that I am, a child of the universe. No less than the trees and the stars. But I just like to go for walks. I walk really, really slowly. I love to track. Animals, and I love to see just the relationships between plants and animals and their communication. I could just go out there and listen to the birds and try to figure out what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
That's good enough for me.
I
love to paint. I'm an artist, and so painting and drawing is a great way to do that.
Yeah. And what is giving you hope right now?
Oh, I'm very hopeful. The indigenous communities I've been working with, I'm like, oh my God, we've got the answers. We had them all along. They were right here. So that is very hopeful to see that. We got a long way to go.
Yeah.
But at least it exists, right? So that I'm seeing a lot of movement in the tropical areas around like coral reefs and forest, non-carbon benefits and things like that. I feel like things are getting more systemic, like all the different efforts are connecting more. I'm very hopeful. I'm seeing like the young people are just done with this mechanistic model.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just not tenable anymore. So I feel like we're very lucky to live in this time.
Yeah, I agree. I feel the same, and especially like being a younger person in the biomimicry field. It's just so exciting to see all of these changes starting to happen and all of these efforts start to fruit.
Yeah, I think so.
Those are all the questions I had for you today. So thank you so much, Dr. Tamsin, again for your time.
Oh, thank you, Lily. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us in this conversation. Until next time, here's to exploring nature's genius in our journey to create a life-friendly future together.